Good evening, my dear students. Today I will tell you about something about the cell biology. In a very brief manner, the cells are the fundamental structural and functional units of all the living organisms. All the living organisms means whether animals or plants. Different types of organisms are present, macroorganisms as well as microorganisms. So microorganisms can be visible. They are mainly unicellular or prokaryotic cells and multicellular or eukaryotic cells. They are known as the macroscopic animals like human beings, different types of plants. Whereas the bacteria, viruses, they are of unicellular organisms but prokaryotes at the same time. Prokaryotes. So prokaryotes and eukaryotic cells, they have got different types of differences. If I tell you something about the membrane structure of a cell, then you will be very much interested to know that each and every cell of any living organism is being bounded by a cell membrane, including the animal cells. But that's a different issue altogether. In case of plant cells, I will talk about that. In case of animal cells, the cells of different sizes and shapes according to their functions and locations in the living organisms, they are all membrane bound. And this membrane has got very peculiarity. They are having two lipid layers, and in between the two lipid layers, there is a protein layer sandwiched in between the two lipid layers. So they are known as the lipid bilayers. So the arrangement is like that: lipid, protein, lipid, LPL, LPL, like this. So this is known as the lipoid nature of the cell membrane. This is known as the lipoid nature of the cell membrane, and this lipoid nature is very, very important so far as cellular activity is concerned. All kinds of intracellular, physical, chemical, physiological, biochemical, whatever you may call, all dependent upon this lipid or lipoid nature of the cell membrane. This imparts a very, very significant property of the cell membrane, what is called the selective permeability. The selective permeability of the cell membrane allows the transportation of only the lipid soluble or nonpolar solvent molecules to be transported across the cell membrane by simple diffusion or passive diffusion without the expenditure of any energy in the form of ATP, NADPH, etc. whatsoever. But those molecules which are not polar solvent, they are soluble or solvent in polar. Polar means water, non-polar means fat. So they are polar solvents, means they are not exactly soluble in fat medium, but they are only soluble in water medium, because water is the universal solvent. So what happens in case of glucose, fructose, galactose, all these monosaccharides, what happens? All these important molecules, they cannot be transported by passive or simple diffusion across the cell membrane. They are bound to their specific receptors or membrane receptors, which are being lined all over the cell membrane, and they are basically protein receptors, and they are very, very specific about their molecules, just like enzyme substrate specificity. So glucose, fructose, galactose, etc., they are bound only to their specific glucose, galactose and fructose receptors, and after binding with the receptors, they are being transported across the cell membrane by a rotation method. It's a very complicated method. It's an hypothetical way what I am talking about, but since it is an hypothesis, but still it is an established fact that this is the way that these important elements of cellular activities like glucose, fructose, galactose, etc., they are being transported across the cell membrane by binding with their specific receptors, and lots of energy expenditure is involved here in the form of ATP, NADPH, like that. So this is known as the membrane or protein mediated transportation, which is also one of the most important functions or factors in maintaining the cellular integrity and all kinds of cellular functions. In case of plant cells, what happens, the outer parts of the plant cells, they are not being bound by, first of all, membrane. They are first bound by a very hard covering, what is known as the cell wall. And this cell wall is made up of a complex polysaccharide known as cellulose. This cellulose, along with mucopolysaccharides, pectin, and different types of very complex and hard polysaccharides, they are being joined with one another in a network to form the outermost covering of the cell wall of a plant cell. And after the cell wall, you will find, as usual, the cell membrane, that LPL, lipid protein lipid bilayers. So the time is very limited right now. I have got every hope, and I intend to meet with you in the coming days to discuss with you in details about all these things. These are very, very important parts, and cell biology or cytology, what is called, is one of the most important topics in biology. If we can make up very good interactions, and then it will be very, very interesting for all of us, both the students and the teachers, to have a clear concept about the entire biological science as a whole. So for that, since we will meet next days, good night to you.